In this 4-part video series, I'm sharing all of my tips and tricks for catching steelhead. This is part 4, hardware, spinners, and spoons. I'm Barry Rigger, welcome to my channel, Rage Fishing. On this channel, I cover all types of fishing throughout the state of Oregon, but there's no species I'd rather chase than steelhead. So I'm sharing my top 4 methods. I've already done the first 3, floats and jigs, floats and beads, and drift fishing. I'll put the link above to the playlist if you want to start at the beginning, but this is part 4, hardware, spinners, and spoons. So in this video, I'm going to go over the why and the when to fish spinners and spoons. I'm going to go over the gear you'll need, so rods, reel, line, and tackle. I'm going to go over the technique, so how to fish spinners and spoons. And at the end, I'm going to give you some bonus tips, which includes assembling some spinners and spoons. So let's dig in. So we'll start out with the why and the when. Hardware fishing can be one of the most exciting ways to catch steelhead because it's a feel game. When that spinner or spoon stops and you feel that heavy head shake, it's just unmistakable. As far as the when to use hardware, they truly can be used under a variety of different water conditions. It just depends on water levels. So when the water's low, use a smaller spinner or spoon, and when the water's high, use a little bit bigger spinner or spoon. I generally use a spinner or spoon as a cleanup lure, and what I mean by that is if I've already fished a jig, bead, or drift gear through a hole, I'll always run a spinner or spoon at the end. Jigs, beads, and drift gear, the steelhead are generally hitting those because it's food, whereas a spinner or spoon, it's a different type of strike. They're hitting them out of aggression. A point I'd like to make for that is if you ever have a drift boat go over your fishing water and you think it spooked the fish, put down whatever you're fishing and throw a spinner in there. The fish will shoot up and they'll be a little bit spooked, but a spinner comes by and they might just slam it. I've used that technique several times to catch a steelhead. So I'm going to recommend a couple books for you. These are kind of the Bibles of spinner and spoon fishing. The first is written by Jed Davis. It's called Spinner Fishing for Steelhead, Salmon, and Trout. It's an excellent book. It's going to go in a lot more detail than I can cover in a short YouTube video. The other one is Bill Herzog's Spoon Fishing for Steelhead. Both of these books I refer to often and I highly recommend them. I'll put the links down below in the description field for both Amazon, and I believe they also have it at AmatoBooks.com. So now let's talk gear, starting with rods. I like an 8.5 foot medium power, fast action, casting or spinning rod for all of my spinner and spoon fishing. The reason I like the shorter rod is I feel like I have better casting accuracy and I can feel the thump of that spinner blade or spoon just a little bit better. I've used up to a 9.5 foot rod for spinner fishing and I feel that extra foot makes me lose a little bit of feel of that spinner blade, so I stick with the 8.5 foot rods. So as far as reels, you can use a spinning or casting reel. Each has their benefits. For me, spinning reels work best when the water's a little bit lower and you're wanting to cast lighter spinners, because casting reels can make it a little bit more difficult to cast lighter baits. As far as a casting reel, the benefit of those is they're very accurate and you can extend your drift. Sometimes when you have a long run with a spinner or spoon, you want to really dig that spinner or spoon down into that holding water, and with a casting reel, all you got to do is hit that bell and you can thumb it down into that holding water. So now let me show you the 2 rods that I use for all of my spinner and spoon fishing. To start out with, this is the rod that I have with me the majority of the time. It's just a lot more versatile. It's a G.Loomis GL3. This is the 1024S. It's 8.5 foot. It's a medium power, fast action. It's rated 8 to 12 pound test line. I've got it paired up with a Shimano Stratic 2500. I've got 12 pound FluoroClear P line on here right now, but I usually use 10 or 12 pound test P line in CX or FluoroClear. And I've got a number 4 R&B spinner that I've put together, and I'll show you how to put those together at the end here. But that's the rod that I have the majority of the time. When the water's a little bit bigger, you'll generally see me fishing with this rod here. It's a G.Loomis GL2. It's also the 1024 model, but it's the C, so the casting version. Medium power, fast action. Again, it's 8.5 feet long. I have it paired up with an old Shimano Curado. This is the 201 E7, and I've got 12 pound P line CXX. I generally use a little bit stronger line when I'm fishing the casting reel. And right now I have an R&B black body with a white matte silver blade number 4 spinner on there. But those are the 2 rods that I use for all of my spinner and spoon fishing. So now let's talk line. If you're using a spinning reel, you want a line with low memory because you don't want to have a bunch of problems with tangles. So I recommend using P-Line CX in either 10 or 12 pound test line. You can also use FluoroClear, which is a very similar line. It's a fluorocarbon coated line, so I think it probably sinks just a little bit faster than just a straight monofilament. If you have Trilene XL, that's also a good manageable line on a spinning reel. I just think it's a little bit too stretchy for my taste when it comes to spinners and spoons. For casting reels, I recommend going with a stronger line like a P-Line CXX or a Maxim Ultra Green. I use 10 or 12 pound test. This line is extremely strong and it's very abrasion resistant. I know that some people have switched to braid for fishing spinners and spoons. I personally think it gets a little too much line twist, so I'm kind of a holdout for using monofilament. So now for the most important piece of this gear list, the lure, and we'll start with spinners. I build my own spinners out of R&B and Pentac components because I want to be able to customize the colors I want, and I want to use better hooks and swivels. At the end of the video, I'm going to build one of these spinners to show you how easy it is to do. You don't need any special tools other than a few pairs of pliers. The reason I like the R&B spinners is they use a heavy blade. It's a thicker metal than some of the commercially available blades, and the body is solid brass. And so it gets down a lot deeper than some of the commercially available spinners like a Blue Fox. I have a very simple recipe when it comes to Steelhead spinner colors. I either use what Jed Davis calls an Ed's Pregnant, and what that is a black body with a silver blade, and I like the white matte silver blade that R&B puts out. I use those on low light days or rainy days. When the water's a little bit clearer or during sunny conditions, I use a polished brass blade with a black body. There's an old saying that lure manufacturers make color schemes to catch fishermen, not steelhead. And I truly believe that. If you have a color that you like, that's fine if you have the confidence in it, but I truly believe black is the best color for the body. And the reason being is it creates a strobing effect as that blade is turning around the body. And I'll kind of demonstrate that here, and I'm going to use one of these white matte silver spinners. So steelhead are going to be sitting on the bottom, and when you're fishing a spinner correctly, it's going to be close to the bottom and it's going to be swinging towards that fish. So when that white matte silver blade goes behind that body, the black body has the most contrast to the white matte silver or even the polished brass. So just think if you were using a body that's the same color as that spinner blade, it's not going to have that strobing effect. And that's what you want to really get the attention of those steelhead. So I just think the black body is the best way to go because it's going to be the most contrasting to that spinner blade. As far as spinner size, during most winter steelhead conditions, I use a number 4. It's just very versatile. Like this is a number 4 R&B. This is one of the polished brass ones. When the water is really low, I might go down to a size 3, like this one right here. When the water is a little bit bigger, sometimes I step up to a 4.5 and sometimes even a 5, but pretty rare. This is an R&B 4.5. You can see it just has a little bit bigger profile. The body's just a little bit heavier, so you can get it down into those heavy flows just a little bit easier. Now, if you don't want to build your own spinners, I would recommend getting yourself some Mepps Agilias. Before I started making my own spinners, that's the spinner that I used, and I had really good success. And I used a size 3 or 4 in the silver blade and the brass blade. Now, some people like the Blue Fox spinner. I personally think they're too lightweight, and the reason being is they have that hollow body and it's kind of a wide profile. I just think it's a little bit harder to get it down into the strike zone. Now, don't get me wrong, I hooked my first steelhead on a Chartreuse number 4 Blue Fox, so it was this color scheme right here. But if you are going to go with the Blue Fox, this is the one I always tell people to get. It's all black, but what's most important is the back of that blade is kind of a brass color, because when that's going down the river, the steelhead are seeing the back side of this. But this is a much more subdued color, and I think it's a little bit closer to the spinner that I like, which is the polished brass R&B. So now let's talk spoons. Now I have to say, when it comes to hardware, I'm fishing spinners the majority of the time, but sometimes I throw on a spoon just because they're so simple. I like the oval shaped spoons like this BC Steel right here. This is made by Pentac. This is a 2/5 ounce in brass. R&B makes an oval shaped spoon. This is what they call the wiggle spoon. This is white matte silver, and it's kind of got that hammer forged on the outside, and that's also in 2/5 ounce. My favorite commercially available spoon is the Little Cleo by Acme. This is a 1/3 ounce in the copper color. And the good old Steely. This thing has been around forever. I remember when I was just a little kid, you'd see these things hanging off of cards like at stores like Bi-Mart for, I think, like 99 cents. But anyway, get yourself some different colors of spoons, different sizes, different weights. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how I assemble my spoons with a single hook. Of all four of my techniques, spinner and spoons have the easiest rigging. You simply tie one on and you're fishing. Now I should mention I build a barrel swivel into the eye of my spinners and my spoons, and that helps reduce line twist. I do not like using a snap swivel because I think it interferes with your ability to feel that blade or the thump of that spoon. Tie these on with a trilene knot because it has 2 loops through the eye of that barrel swivel, and it's an extremely strong knot. It's what I use the majority of the time. So the technique for spinner and spoon fishing is similar to that of drift fishing. I usually start by casting slightly upriver, just right in front of me, and I let that spinner or spoon drift down through that holding water. With a spinner, you want that spinner blade just barely spinning. The tip of your rod should just be looking like this. You don't want that spinner blade looking like a helicopter. As far as a spoon, you want that blade just wobbling back and forth. You don't want it spinning as well. The one thing that you can't have with spinner or spoon fishing is what Jed Davis calls save the spinner syndrome. People that are concerned about losing spinners are not going to be fishing deep enough. In Bill Herzog's book, he talks about ringing the dinner bell, and what he's referring to is allowing that spoon to hit the bottom. And I think about that saying when I'm fishing spinners or spoons. On a good day of steelhead fishing, my spinner blades will be all scratched up from tapping the bottom of the river. Sound travels really well underwater, and it might just get the attention of that steelhead. But you gotta be fishing down in the strike zone towards the bottom or you're just not gonna hook as many fish. So as far as drag, you want your drag set fairly tight because if you get a strike, you're gonna wanna set that hook. But once you get that hook set for that initial run, you probably wanna loosen your drag just a little bit. And then as the fish tires out, you can start tightening that down to land it. Fishing a spinner or spoon, you can end up with a little bit of line twist. So what I would recommend, especially if you're using a spinner, is stop that blade every, let's say, 5 to 10 seconds. In theory, when the blade starts spinning again, it is gonna spin in the opposite direction. And you can do that by just throwing just a little bit of slack in your line with the tip of your rod. Another thing I would recommend is when you reel in and you see that spinner or spoon spinning, just let it unwind. I even kind of shake my rod tips so that that line can unwind all the way down to my reel. So now it's time for Steelhead Arts and Crafts. We're going to start by building a steelhead spinner. Now I did a video on my channel that's a little bit more in depth on how to build steelhead spinners. I'll put a link above if you want it a little bit more detail. So real quick, let me tell you the parts you're going to need, and you can get these from R&B Lure Company or from Pentac. This is the spinner wire. It's .031. It's open end wire. You're going to need some bearings. These are just little metal beads. I have some large and some small because I use one of each for each spinner. You're going to need a clevis. It's the piece that attaches the spinner blade to the wire. You're going to need some bodies. These are number 4 black R&B spinner bodies. You're going to need some blades. I've got polished brass and some white matte silver R&B blades. I'm going to be using this because I've already got some polished brass blades. And then I would recommend using a single hook, and these are open-eyed single hooks. That way you can put them on after you've already completed the lure. But I have some Gamakatsus, and I've got some, these are like the sickle style hooks from R&B. Lastly, you're going to need a barrel swivel. These are size 10s, but you can use a size 7 as well, and I build that into the eye of my spinner. Now, as far as the tools that you'll need for spinner building, you'll need at least a pair of needle nose pliers. I like these really small ones. They're just cheap ones I bought from Bi-Mart. I also like to use these round nose tip pliers like this. It just helps me form the eye of the spinner, and you'll need a pair of wire cutters. So I've already got the components laid out here. So you're going to start by taking the wire. That's the first step. And if you're going to put a treble hook on, you want to put it on this open end now. I don't recommend using treble hooks. I don't think they're as good for the fish. But if you're going to, that's when you're going to put it on. So go ahead and slide the body on, and then you just take the bottom of that open end wire and push it up inside the body. The single hooks have an open eye, so I'm going to put that on last. So that's the first step right there. Next, I take the large bead and put it on the wire, followed up by the small bead. And those are just bearings that helps the spinner spin. Next, you take your clevis This is a size 2. That's the piece that holds your blade to the wire. Go ahead and put that on. Each side of the clevis has a hole in it, so you just put that on your wire. Now this is where I use my round nose pliers, and I make the eye using these. Now you can use just a pair of small needle nose, but I like these. It makes a nice round eye. Now that bottom loop, I try to make my top loop in line with that. I don't know if it matters, but that's just what I do. So I go ahead and I clip on those round nose pliers about 1/4 inch above the clevis. I just take my hand and I bend that wire all the way around, just like that. And that kind of forms that eye. This is when you slide the barrel swivel on. So you build that right into the eye of that spinner. So now holding that in place, this is where you need your needle nose. Grab the main wire in that eye and just hang on to that. And then you can just manually with your hand spin that spinner wire around. So I made 2 tight wraps as close to that main spinner wire as I can. And so it kind of looks like this at that point. So now I take my wire cutters and I just cut that tag end off as close as I can to the main wire. Now on my last video I had somebody say, oh, you did that wrong, you're supposed to bend it back and forth until it breaks on its own because now it has a sharp end. Well, I'll tell you what I do. I'm going to take my needle nose pliers and just kind of bend that down as flat as possible. And if you really are concerned about that sharp edge, you can take like some sort of a little file like this, and you can just grind that sharp edge down and to where it's dull. So now the spinner is essentially done minus the hook. So now I'm going to use a single Siwash, a number 1 Gamakatsu, and these are open-eyed. So you just take that, you put that on that bottom loop, take your needle nose, and just close that eye. And now your spinner's complete. So that's a number 4, as Jed Davis would call it, and Ed's pregnant. Love this spinner. It's probably my number 1 producer. So at this point, when I have a completed spinner, I buy these little Ziploc bags off of Amazon. I'll put a link below, but you can put your spinners in these bags and throw them right in your backpack or chest pack, and it's nice and flat. It keeps your spinner from getting scratched up, and you don't have to have a separate box for your spinners and spoons. So now let's assemble a spoon. I got a little Clio right here. Bought this at Bi-Mart. It's a 1/3 ounce. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this treble hook. The little Clios come with split rings top and bottom. If you buy Pentax or R&Bs, you're going to have to buy split rings, and I recommend using a size 3. I'm just using a pair of split ring pliers, and if you don't know what those are, they're just needle nose pliers that have a little bit of a tooth that helps open those split rings. So I'm getting rid of the treble hook. Now I've got 2 size 5 barrel swivels. These are VMCs, so really they're probably about the size of like a size 8 Roscoe swivel. So I'm going to put these top and bottom. I'm going to open up the split ring here, and I'm just going to roll that barrel swivel on. Again, top and bottom. And I'll explain why you're putting one on the bottom in just a second here. Alright, so I've got that little Clio with barrel swivels top and bottom on the split rings. Now I'm going to take a size 1 Gamakatsu Siwash hook. They're open eye, and that's how you're able to put it on that bottom barrel swivel. So you want to make sure to put it on the tail end, of course. Don't make that mistake. I'm going to put that on that barrel swivel and just use my pliers to close that eye, just like that. And what that does is it allows that hook to swivel so that if you hook a steelhead, it can't use that spoon to basically pry out the hook if it was directly connected to the split ring. So now I'm just going to throw this in one of these little plastic bags and throw it right in my chest pack. So one more final tip, if you get your spinner or spoon hung up on the bottom, usually it's just stuck on the bedrock, and you can use the downriver belly trick to get it free. And what that is you let out a bunch of line so that you have a belly downriver of the snag. I actually did a video on my channel. If you want to see it in action, I'll put the link above. So once you've got that belly downriver of the snag, you take your rod and you just sweep it upriver a couple times really sharp, and oftentimes that'll pull that lure free because the line is pulling from the opposite direction. section. Now, one thing I'll ask, if you use these techniques, you're going to catch steelhead. If you catch a wild fish, please take care of them, handle them gently, keep them in the water, don't drag them up on the bank. If you've got to get a photo, only do so if you have a friend present. Once they're ready, lift the fish up slightly, take a couple pictures, and get that fish swimming as soon as it's ready. We have to take care of our wild fish to ensure the future of these steelhead runs. One other thing I would ask is, if you love these fish as much as I do, consider joining CCA, Coastal Conservation Association, or Northwest Steelheaders. I'm a member of both. They're working for us for the future of our steelhead and salmon runs. Well, I hope this 4-part series, How to Catch Steelhead, has helped you out, and I wish you all a very successful winter steelhead season. If you catch a steelhead based on anything that you've learned from this 4-part series, I would truly appreciate hearing about it. You can get a hold of me on Instagram at SteelheadRage, or on my Facebook page, which is Rage Fishing. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, hit the bell so you don't miss future videos. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment field. I always get back to everybody. And if I earned it, give me a thumbs up. All those things help me out on YouTube. If you want to see this technique further in action, I'm going to put a video recommendation at the end that shows just how effective a spinner or spoon can be after you've already fished a section of holding water. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.